I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my vanishing co-host, Brett.
There you go, Alice. I always love your ability to take, no matter what we're covering, and come up with a word that doesn't actually describe me. It's impressive.
Doesn't describe you at all, because really, we want to rush past. Yes, Brett, we're so glad you're here. So glad you're not vanished. But what we're really excited about is our amazing guest, Jennifer Taylor from Vanished podcast. Jen, thank you so much for being here with us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Well, I mean, Jen, there's so much to talk about. Obviously, you're a fellow attorney. It's always so wonderful to have a fellow attorney on the podcast, a fellow podcaster who's waded into the true crime space as an attorney, because it's so wonderful just to have people who have legal insights into a lot of these cases to be able to talk about it from that perspective. Obviously, you have a co-host as well. Before we kind of dive in to one of the coolest projects you've gotten to work on lately, it's Amelia Earhart. Can you give everyone a little bit of a background as to, how you became an attorney and how you got into podcasting?
How I became an attorney, I don't really know. Everyone always asks me, why did you want to be an attorney? And I was like, well, I started off by doing engineering and I hated it. And then I was like, guess I can do this. And so I just thought it would be a good idea. And so I went to law school and I liked doing it enough that I'm still doing it. But I started out, I clerked for a little bit. I did some criminal defense for a little bit. Now I do construction, like residential construction litigation, and I podcast. I started podcasting in 2019 when I was still doing criminal defense. I was still a very, very new attorney. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts, and I had a lot of friends in the podcasting space, and I listened to this show called Chasing Earhart, and it was hosted and still is hosted because it's still airing episodes, but it's hosted by Chris Williamson. And he reached out to me completely cold out of the blue one day, and he says, hey, will you guest on my show? I'm looking for an attorney because I want to ask some Amelia Earhart questions to an attorney. And I was completely confused as to why. And I was like, I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about Amelia Earhart. I'm sorry. I don't think I can help you. And he just was really persistent. And he was like, no, I'm talking to a bunch of different people. They all have different theories about what happened to her. And everyone keeps telling me, I bet that if I took my evidence to a court of law, I could probably prove my case beyond a reasonable doubt. He's like, everyone keeps telling me this. And so I thought it would be cool to ask an attorney what that even means. And so it started out as just an interview. It was this fun little interview. And he sent me all kinds of questions about well, if I have two different experts that disagree, how do I know who to trust? And what does it mean to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt? And it was a really, really fun interview about something that was not really law related, but it was really interesting. And we had this idea, mostly him, but kind of the two of us. We were we had 5 different theories that he had started putting out there. He had a new show called Vanished, and he wanted to find a creative way to tell the world about these theories and kind of test them rather than give people their 15 minutes to kind of say what they want to say and then leave. He wanted to be able to really ask them hard questions and really challenge them. And so we had this idea of maybe doing mock trials or doing an audio mock trial. And I don't know why, but everybody agreed to do this. And so we had some really, really cool people. We had Tom Detweiler, who was the chief operations person for Bob Ballard when they found the Titanic. He's currently looking for Amelia Earhart. He agreed to do it. So we had him on and I asked him cross-examination questions. And we had a guy named Bill Snavely who has already been on 2 expeditions looking for the plane where he thinks it is. He's trying to raise money for a third. We had just tons of people come on to say what they were doing and just open themselves up to me asking them really impertinent questions, as someone who had really just now entered this space. And I'm like challenging these people that have been doing it for decades. But we had so much fun. And that's how I got into Amelia Earhart and how I got into podcasting. And I've I really never let Earhart go, because once you start looking at it and trying to figure it out, it's just something that you can't put down ever. As it's 2024, 5 years later, and I'm still a little bit obsessed with it.
It sounds like you may enjoy this whole podcasting thing more than being a lawyer. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah,
Based
I gab
on...
a little. I'm sorry.
So tell me this, now that we've sort of made the transition into Amelia Earhart. So a lot of people have disappeared, and a lot of people have disappeared in mysterious circumstances. But there's something about Amelia Earhart that still captures people to this day. What is it that makes her disappearance so enigmatic?
Imagine like if Taylor Swift just went missing. Like, imagine if you like woke up one day and no one knew where Taylor Swift was. That's kind of what happened in 1937. Amelia Earhart was the woman. She was everybody's role model, and she was doing things women were not doing in 1937. She was an adjunct professor at Purdue. She was breaking records. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic and the second person to do it. She had set a bunch of speed records, and she'd really made it her mission to mentor and encourage women, not just to enter flying and enter what today we would call STEM, but to do anything. Like she was very passionate about this stance that was very radical in 1937, which was that women can do whatever they want. And she just happened to also look like a badass doing whatever she wanted. She was a huge celebrity. She was a sweetheart. And when she went missing, the entire world mourned for her. And so I think that has a lot to do with it.
Jen, I knew that you would fit right in even before you started talking, because the reference to Taylor Swift, I think, hit everyone right in the gut. We know exactly what it would mean if we were alive in the 30s and witnessed all of this happening. And you're exactly right. I mean, Amelia Earhart, the fact that, it's right now we're recording in August and there's already Halloween costumes out. And I see Amelia Earhart costumes for little girls and boys everywhere, because nearly a century later, she still grips the imagination of what it means to do the impossible, because she literally did the impossible. And in some ways, and we'll talk more about the actual disappearance, what led to it. Some would say she didn't complete that flight that we know of in a way that we all expected her to. But despite that, it wasn't a failure. People continue to look at her as a role model of breaking literal barriers of physics, of what women can do, of what anyone can do in general. And it's always so uplifting when you have someone to look to. And even though this ended, and I think the fact that so far, spoiler alert, no one has found her. She remains this enigma. And in some ways, like a lot of missing person cases, she continues to live on. Right? There is no end to her story because there is this continued mystery around what happened. So can you take us to this last flight? And as you noted, and we've just all finished watching the Olympics, I think quite literally the whole world's eyes were on Amelia Earhart as she was about to circumnavigate the world. Is that right?
Yes, she was an international star. Obviously it's before social media, it's before television, really. It's before, like, this was people's entertainment. Lindenberg was also a celebrity of the time. They called Amelia Lady Lindy. I hate that. I don't like calling her that because I prefer to refer to her on her own terms, not as the female version of another like male superstar of the day. But that does go to show you like how famous she was. I mean, she was being compared to the other big famous aviator of the day. And yeah, when she announced her around the world trip, they wanted to be there to see her land, to see her take off. They wanted to get the updates. This was not just an American phenomenon. It was definitely a worldwide phenomenon.
First of all, I want to make one note. I was reading, my daughter got a library book. It was about the gingerbread man. And yet in that library book, Amelia Earhart was mentioned. And as I was reading it to her tonight, I was like, oh, there you go. There's another reference to Amelia Earhart. It is amazing
Love that.
how she's remained so iconic. But walking through that last flight, like as you said, she had crossed the Atlantic in a solo flight. I guess I didn't realize she was the second person to do that. So it was
The first
Lindbergh and
woman,
then her.
though.
She was the first woman. Yeah, but
Right.
Lindbergh is the one that did it first, and she was second.
I mean, that's incredible that she was the second person. I mean, because when Lindbergh did it, it was such a big deal. I just didn't realize that she was that close to him in doing it. So she'd already done that, and now she's going to do this even more extraordinary thing. She's going to do this flight around the world. Where did that flight start off? How far had she gotten before there was concern that something had happened to her?
So she had almost made it all the way around the world. She announced it from Miami. It had started in Oakland, I think. And so she flies across the continental US. She announces she's doing her around the world flight. This was actually her second attempt at doing this. But she leaves from Miami. She is in Lae, Papua New Guinea. And her next stop was going to be Howland Island. And then from Howland, she was supposed to go, I believe, to Hawaii and then back to Oakland. So she was almost done, and the Lae to Howland leg was going to be the longest and most dangerous.
And that was over open water. Howland, in case you've never heard of it, because I certainly had not before really diving into Amelia Earhart, is this like speck of an island. I mean, we obviously have a lot more instruments today, but she really was shooting for like a speck of dust in this vast ocean. And there were thousands of miles from her takeoff point to Howland Island. And she had a co-navigator, I guess you would call it that.
She had a navigator. His name was Fred Noonan, who also disappeared along with her. He was a fantastic navigator. He taught navigation at Pan Am. He was especially good at Dead Reckoning and at celestial navigation. He was not the first choice navigator. There was another navigator with her on her team in the first attempt. So they did back in the spring of 1937, they did a first attempt. She crashed the plane. It ground looped. The plane had to go and be repaired. Harry Manning, who's another fantastic navigator and who understands Morse code, which is really important to understand for later because Fred Noonan and Amelia Earhart, they did not understand Morse code. So he was initially supposed to be on that flight with her. And after the ground loop incident and them having to delay everything, he just wasn't able to do the trip with her anymore. So Fred Noonan, who was like an assistant navigator, was kind of bumped up, and then he took that position. But he was a fantastic navigator in his own right.
And I want to note that, by the time they get to this point, because I think I had always thought, oh, she took off, on a flight and then was never found. By the time we get to this flight, the world had been watching her for weeks at this time, if not longer than a month, right? She'd been flying around the world and had made like 20 plus stops and was greeted like international hero all over the world as she's landing. Yes. I mean, so this is kind of like the Tour de France in the set if you had stops, right? Except they're actual stops because you have to refuel, you have to eat, that sort of thing. And every time she grounds, imagine like if an Eras Tour happened every time she hit the ground, right? Like everyone is freaking out. Amelia Earhart is in Italy, right? And so
that is exactly what it was.
Yes. So again, it wasn't just in my mind. It had been like, oh, it's just another flight. She takes off. Rather, this is one of the most anticipated flights. People have been following her tour around the world. Every time she lands, she is greeted with like parades, and people are coming out on the streets celebrating her each time she lands. On her way around the world is as if she has just accomplished, which she has, world-breaking records. And then everyone is watching her take off. And it's not like it happens immediately. Those of us who are old enough to have seen some rocket ships take off and blow up tragically on TV, you see it right away, right? It's something that you see on TV, but that's not what happens here. She takes off and is actually in the air for hours upon hours. We don't exactly know, of course, but she's not expected for about a day. And so this is not a situation where we can even track her and know what's going on and know when there's a Mayday situation. Everyone's waiting with bated breath. We don't have Twitter. No one is tracking her NetJet or whatever, in the air. All we know is she's taken off and we're all looking towards Howland Island in the middle of the Pacific. And it's going to be the most amazing feat anyone's ever done, man or woman. And then she doesn't appear. So what happens from there?
Well, so she takes off from Leh, Papua New Guinea on July 2nd, 10 a.m. local time, and she's supposed to communicate with radio operator at Leh. It's supposed to be hourly. They don't get that first transmission though until about 4 hours after she's left. One really important thing to note though about her leaving is that amongst researchers, there is a bit of a heated debate over how much fuel the plane had when it took off. And that's important for trying to calculate how far she might have gotten. And there are some theories, like the theory that we talked about on the documentary, that she actually had enough fuel to turn around and start heading back the opposite direction. So there's actually, and we can talk about fuel later. I don't want to get into that right now, but just know that some people say she left with 1,150 gallons of fuel, and some people say that she could not have done that because the weight, the plane would have been too heavy to take off, and so she had less fuel. But either way, she leaves at 10 a.m. About 4 hours into her flight, she starts radioing in to Leh updates. And she's saying, all is fine, everything's good. At one point, there's cloud cover, there's cumulus clouds. So she has to gain altitude to be able to get above the clouds. That is something that would have taken extra fuel to gain that altitude. So not great, but she's reporting that everything's fine, everything's good. She later reports that she's experiencing stronger than expected headwinds. Headwinds were expected to be 12 knots, I think, 12 miles per hour, and they were about twice what she was expecting. That's another potential problem because now she's using more fuel because of the wind resistance. But all in all, everything seems fine. At some point, she's not communicating with Leh anymore. She's too far away. And so we're in this kind of holding pattern. Like we have to wait until she's close enough to Howland. And there's a ship waiting off the coast of Howland Island for her. And there's a radio operator on that ship who's there waiting to receive her message and to communicate with her and help guide her in so that she can land at Howland. And they start to hear from her at about 3 o'clock in the morning their time. And they've crossed the date line at this point. So when you're looking at the documents, it says July 2nd, 3 in the morning. So it looks like they've traveled back in time. But she has been in the air for like 18 to 20 hours at this point. One really, really important thing is that they never were able to establish two-way communication. The Itasca heard her saying, like, hey, like, we're 200 miles out. About 30 minutes later, she says, well, we're about 100 miles out. That is something that's puzzled people for a very long time because she was not going 200 miles an hour. It's possible. So kind of already there's little hints that maybe they don't know exactly where they are, because really the only explanation is that she wasn't actually 200 miles out. And so now they're trying to kind of figure out, where are we? About 7 o'clock in the morning is when things are starting to get a little anxious. She's clearly calling in and they're trying to talk to her, and she's very clearly not hearing what they're saying. She's nothing that she is saying is responsive to their messages to her. At 7:41 in the morning, she says, we must be on you, but cannot see you. And she says that she's flying at 1,000 feet. So now she's coming in at a much lower altitude, presumably because there's clouds and she's trying to see. The problem with doing that is that reduces your range of vision. It reduces your visibility. So if you're not close and you're coming down, you're not going to be able to visually spot the island. She does say at 7:50, she says, "We are circling." And then her very last transmission comes in at 8:43 in the morning local time. And so her call sign is KHAQQ. So what the log actually says, it says KHAQQ to Itasca. We are on the line 157337. We'll repeat message. We will repeat this on 6210. Wait. And that's it. No one hears her voice ever again after that.
So, a couple things on this that spring to mind. Number one, you mentioned that her navigator was really good at dead reckoning, which my understanding is basically knowing where you are based on where you've been. And based
Yes.
on sort of fixed points and the direction you're heading, how quick you're going, you can estimate where you are. And if you're really good at that, you can figure out exactly where you are. I would think there would be two problems with that if you're flying over the ocean. Number one, not a lot of intermediate points to confirm that you've got your dead reckoning correct. And the second thing, if you get it wrong over the ocean, getting back on track would seem to be really difficult. And you wouldn't know. There's no way to check, right? Like it's not like now you can pull up your GPS and see if you are where you think you are. You couldn't do that. So if at any point they got off, how could they ever get back on looking for this, as we said, small speck of land in the middle of this vast blue ocean?
Right. So a couple of things. About halfway there was another ship that was supposed to serve as that kind of confirmation point. The USS Ontario was stationed about halfway. And so they were supposed to be able to fly over the USS Ontario because they knew exactly where that was. And so Noonan should have been able to say, okay, we're here. This is what time it is. I have my map. And hopefully that would, now that's halfway. That's still 1,000 miles from Howland. So the problem that you point out is still a problem, but that was supposed to help. Now, a guy named Elgin Long, who's this researcher that looked at this for a really long time, he theorizes, because there was another ship about 40 miles to the north, he theorizes that they flew over that ship when they were supposed to fly over the Ontario. And if you make the mistake there, that will only compound itself 1,000 miles out.
So they did
The
say
other,
they saw
go
a
ahead.
ship. They did say they saw a
We don't
ship.
know. We don't know. We just know that that was what they were supposed and we like I don't think we have any way to verify whether they flew over the Ontario or whether they flew over this other ship. But that was the plan. The other thing to point out is so something that they said in their transmission, like we're on the line 157337. That was another kind of method they had. What they're talking about is what's called a line of position. And it has to do with like when the sun comes up, that line of like where the daylight meets the shadow. And I'm probably not the best person to explain it, but in the in the dumbed down, like not a pilot way that I understand it, is you know where the line of position is supposed to be on any given day. And when the sun comes up, you can somehow calculate the line of position and where you are based on what time it is when you see the sunrise. And then through a bunch of math, you're supposed to be able to shift the line of position east or west based on what you're looking for. So, like if you have calculated correctly the line of position, which they knew was going to be 157337, and that has to do with angles and like that was the line of position for the sun that day, whatever. And then they'll say, okay, well, we're going to shift it until it's where we think Howland is. So now you know Howland is somewhere on that line. And so all we have to do is run north and south on the line until we find it. So if you've overshot to the north or the south, then that should be able to provide that correction. But that also requires you to calculate the line of position correctly and do all your math correctly. And it also helps for you to be able to get a bearing on your destination, which was something, if you read the logs, she's saying, I can't get a bearing on you. I can't get a bearing. Can you please, like, please help, like, send out a signal. And because they never could communicate with each other, she may have been on the line of position, but if she's too far south or too far north and she thinks she should be closer, that's still not going to necessarily help her.
And was it Howland or bust? Was there any sort of fallback position or alternative landing if something went wrong?
So, one of the things we talk about on the documentary is that she had this kind of backup plan that if she couldn't find Howland, she was going to turn around and go land at the Gilberts, which is, they're not really islands, they're like atolls, it's just rocks. So, what we posit in the documentary is that she would have done that, but that she should have had enough fuel left. And given her state of mind, the theory in the documentary that we present is, well, if she had enough fuel left, instead of crash landing at the Gilberts, which would have totaled the plane, and then she would not be able to complete the trip, she went all the way back to Papua New Guinea. That theory
Is that like
really
20
can,
hours?
it's not all the way back, but it's almost all the way back.
Okay, so but it's like a long, long
It's a
way.
long way back. It's a long way back.
And she had
So
enough fuel for that? Because
that's that's the question. Is, did she have enough fuel for that?
and how could that be a question in the sense that obviously everything was logged, like you said, there are actual physics to this, whether her plane was too heavy to take off. So is it that we had the records and we just no longer know, or where does the question mark come from? Because it was such a hotly watched takeoff, where does the question mark come in? This is such a, like you said, a lawyer question.
So the question mark there, it comes in several different spots. So we actually do have documentation. It's a report that was put out almost a month after she disappeared, and it was the radio guy at Lay who wrote up a report about, here's everything that we did, here's everything that happened on July 2nd, and in the days leading up to her takeoff at Lay, because they had been there for a couple of days, and so he's documenting everything that's going on. And he says that the plane left with 1,100 US gallons of fuel. And so that's a pretty good source of information. There are people that will argue that the plane could not have possibly taken off with that much fuel because of the weight. So this was a plane that had been modified. It was basically a flying gas tank. There was extra fuel tanks on there, and there was really nothing else on the plane but these two people, some personal effects, and gas. Like before they leave, they are throwing things off the plane to try to reduce weight. And so I've had people tell me, oh, there's no way. I've had other people say, that's not true at all. Like she could have and she did, So it really, at that point, it kind of just depends on which engineer you want to believe. But the other problem too, and well, really the other like question mark, is how much fuel was she using and how fast was she burning fuel while she was flying, because she had stronger than expected headwinds. She was flying at a higher altitude than was expected, and it takes fuel to gain and load. Like if you're just staying at a consistent altitude, that takes less fuel than constantly having to change altitudes because of bad weather. So these are factors we can't know for certain. And so we have all of these different companies, some of them really reputable engineering, like data companies, that are saying, we're crunching all of these numbers and we say she used this much fuel. And then there will be other people that will say, we're crunching all the numbers and we're saying she used this much fuel. And it's all proprietary because they're all private companies that want to find the plane before the other people find the plane. And so and I don't understand any of that stuff. I just have to listen to people we interview say, oh no, she had enough fuel left when she talked to the Itasca to go back. And other people will say, no, she absolutely didn't. She said she's out of fuel. That means out. And she crashed. She had nowhere else to go. She was out of options. So really, when you're not an engineer, you're just somebody like me trying to figure out what happened, you have to just look at the logs and look at what she was saying. And she's saying, I'm out of gas. She's saying, I'm circling. She's saying, I'm going to repeat this message, wait. And then she doesn't. So I think that that's all really good evidence that she no longer could send transmissions.
Let me ask you this. So one thing you noted earlier was they could hear her, but she could not hear them. Is that an indication that maybe the radio on the ship was better than the radio on the plane, so they could hear her because they had a more powerful radio, but when they're sending out the message, her radio is not powerful enough to get the message because she's further away than she thinks she is? Does that make sense? Like, does that tell us, that fact that she could not hear them, tell us anything about where she was relative to the ship?
So something to note about the Itasca logs is they also note the signal strength. They don't just know what she's saying. And when I say signal strength, there's really two things you're looking at. You're looking at how much background noise, and you're looking at how loud. And the signal strength, if you've ever like done anything with a ham radio, it's S1 to S5. S5 meaning loud and clear, no background noise, loud. And nowadays, the machines will tell you what the signal strength is. But back in 1937, you had a dude listening who will write down based on what he's hearing. And there was a guy named Leo Bellarts who was the radio operator on the Itasca. He indicated that they were S5 signal strength. If that's correct, then she was within 100 miles of the Itasca, if that's correct. And I've heard interviews, it was from the 70s, where he's an old man at that point, and he's doing interviews, and he's saying with real conviction in his voice, he's saying, I heard her so loud, I thought I could walk outside and look up and be able to see her, and I was astonished that I couldn't. So I think to answer your question, I think no, it doesn't say that. I think that she was close when she was sending those messages. I think what it tells us is that there was something wrong with her radio. She had done testing. They had done some like a 30-minute like flight test before they left, the day before they left on the 1st. They also tested the radio, and at Lay, they were sending her signals. She was testing her direction finder more than the radio, but they were having issues with the radio. Even then, she's like, "Oh, I can't pick up your signal." And she's like, "Oh, I think the rationalization was your signal is too powerful. We're too close. Everything's fine." I think that if her radio was working properly, then she would not have disappeared. I think that was what happened.
And do you say that because then the people on the ship would have been able to help her find her bearing?
Yeah, so what they needed to do was she needed to be able to figure out which direction relative to her they were. So, like, for example, if she knows that they're south of her and she's on the line of position, they can travel south. And then the reverse would work as well. She was saying, we can't get a bearing on you. Can you try getting a bearing on us? But to do that, you have to like send out a sound signal. I think the Itasca was actually sending out the letter A in Morse code, like over and over and over again to try to help her get a bearing. And because they never could connect, it was impossible to get that to work. And I've heard reports also that her direction finder wasn't working properly anyway, so maybe it wouldn't have mattered. But the Itasca also wasn't able to figure out where she was. They had a direction finder.
I feel like, I'm no Amelia Earhart, but I feel like if I were about to embark on this very, the most daring flight of my life, I may be like, whoa, my radio's not working. It's really going to be a matter of life and death. Let's wait till the next
No,
day.
I agree with you. So here's what I'll say about that. They really wanted to be home on July 4th because they were going to have like this very special July 4th celebration parade. Amelia Earhart is home. She's just circumnavigated the globe, and she was married to her publisher and her promoter. And there's been a lot of people that have criticized, maybe he was pushing her a little too hard. Maybe she was under too much pressure to finish this by a certain time.
That's fascinating. Wow. I hadn't thought about that angle.
I want to go back to this radio thing because, as I said, this is becoming like DB Cooper. I'm feeling the suction of this case. Okay, so you've explained why she couldn't get a bearing on them because she couldn't receive their signal. But you said at the end that they couldn't get a bearing on her. Why would that be? If she was so close that he's hearing her loud and clear, why wouldn't they have been able to triangulate her position based on what they're hearing from her?
So I'm not 100% sure. I've asked radio people to explain this to me so much. I think that there is an explanation. I think that I'm just really bad at understanding the radio stuff. Here's what I'll say. So like I'm looking on, and I've pulled up this website that I sometimes look at, that it's actually the Tiger website. It's Rick Gillespie's website. And, I say what you will about him. He's got a lot of good data on his website. And he has this little explanation of like trying to explain how that works. And he says that the Itasca, he says they didn't have the capability of sending voice messages. So that's why they're sending the Morse code. And she's saying, we're receiving the signals, but I can't get a minimum. Please send it on 3105. Please send it on this. And then they're like, well, we can't do that. So I guess to answer your question, I don't really know. I don't understand because I don't understand how radio direction finders work. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, let's move on to she doesn't show up. She sends out that last transmission. Nothing else is heard. What is the response at that point?
Well, at that point now they're sending out searches. And I have always been a big proponent of looking at the logs. It kind of sounds like she flat ran out of gas, not I'm about to run out of gas, I have to turn around. And but the problem with that theory is that they very thoroughly searched that area within hours and they didn't find her. I've asked.
And if they
Go
searched
ahead.
that area, so she would have been, she didn't make it to Howland, so we know it's not that. So it could have been Gilbert's, maybe back to Papua New Guinea, or really probably more likely in terms of just space and volume, right, would be the Pacific Ocean. So at that time, I mean, there are crashes now that we can't find in the ocean, and certainly, in such a vast ocean. So at this time, even with the searches within like an hour of her kind of disappearing, what do they expect to find? And do you know the probability? I thought the probability of finding a plane in the ocean is already very small to begin with. So do you know like what the probability was? Like how improbable is it that no one has found any trace of her?
So if you talk to the Nautico guys, that's the company that Elgin Long was working with, and for up until 2010, I think they were the people that were kind of leading the charge and looking in that area. If you ask them, they will say needle in a haystack, like think about how hard it was to find the Titanic, and this is smaller and deeper. They will tell you it's dang near impossible. If you talk to people, if you talk to other people, they will say, well, she had only gone down within the last few hours. They knew roughly, or they thought they knew where she should have been. She wasn't there. Like we should have been able to find her. And some people will argue that because this was a plane that was basically nothing but empty gas tanks, the plane should have floated and should have been found by people that were searching.
Now, she obviously was very skilled. If she knew that she was out of gas, that's something that's in her control. A water landing is something I think that she would have known how to do. Did she know how to water land in a way that would have allowed the plane not to just kind of burst into smithereens?
Okay, this is total speculation on my part, but I'm going to say no. The reason why I say no is because very few people were flying over the water. This is not a skill. Like these days, when you're like training as a pilot and you're going to be doing a lot of flights over water, this is something you would learn. This is something that would be taught to you. And she was a pioneer. She was one of the first people doing these things. She was the one that was, her and others, but this was a very, very new skill and a new science. Like even with navigation at this time, there were so many people that were great at navigating on a boat, but trying to find a navigator that could do it in the air was actually very difficult. And when I talked to Tom Detweiler, who's with Nauticos, he told me that to land the plane on the water appropriately would take a great deal of skill. And she was a skilled flyer, but she also crashed a lot of planes. Like she was, and there are
Isn't
people
that a great motto? You have
will,
to crash a few planes to cross the Atlantic,
she I'm not afraid to say, like I would say, like as far as skill in terms of taking off and landing, that was not her strong suit. The ground loop that happened the first time around, when you say, oh, what happened? Pilot error, 100%. Like she crashed that plane, and she'd crashed planes before. So I don't have a lot of faith. While I believe she was a great pilot, I'm not sure that I would venture to say that she was going to be that skilled at making such a precision landing. And she was panicking. And that's not speculation. Leo Bellart's in his interview said it sounded like she was panicking.
Which is understandable. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
If you're in that
I'm
situation.
panicking listening to it 100 years later.
So let's go ahead and talk about some theories, and let's go ahead and debunk one real quick. Was Amelia Earhart actually a spy for the U.S. government who was captured by the Japanese and executed?
I got to be real careful. I got a lot of friends that very strongly believe that that's true. So I got to be real diplomatic. But
You can
I'm
just
gonna
say
come
no.
out and say no.
I mean, you were talking about this earlier about how famous she was. I mean, I would imagine that if somehow she ended up in Japanese controlled territory, and remember, for those of you who maybe aren't thinking of it in these terms, this is during the period leading up to World War II, and the Japanese were already very much at war. I mean, they had invaded China by this point. They are adverse to the United States. So there's a sort of theory that if the Japanese found her, they would treat her as a spy and execute her. But I think, as you've pointed out, she was also a worldwide sensation, and rescuing her would have been this massive coup for them, like a diplomatic, wonderful moment for the Japanese Empire to be able to say, look at this, we rescued the poor American who fell into our laps. So I don't know really why they would do that. Is there any actual evidence that you know of that would support the Japanese theory?
So I can tell you what evidence has been put forward, and we can talk about it. If you remember the History Channel documentary way back when, there's the infamous Jalute dock photo, which was debunked very quickly after the episode aired. And I'm pretty sure the History Channel even pulled their episode. If you don't know what I'm talking about, what they found was a photo that they said was taken in July of 1937 in Japan near the Marshall Islands, where they think that she crashed her plane and was subsequently captured by the Japanese. And it does appear to show a white lady and a white male on a dock, surrounded by other Asian individuals. After that episode aired, I don't remember who found it, but somebody found a travel book dated 2 years before thereabouts that had that photo in it. So that was debunked very quickly, but there are still people, some of them I'm friends with, that very much believe still in the Jalute dock photo. So
I
that's
think
one
that
thing.
I think that episode aired sometime in between Ancient Aliens and Yeti the Killer Lives on the History Channel. So I don't know that I would put too much stock into it, but I'm glad we could quickly debunk that theory. Like Alice is
Yeah.
about to ask, what are some of the other theories of what happened?
Yeah, what are some of the other theories? And then, of course, all of us want to hear because you've spent so much time. And I don't think we've mentioned this. I'm so sorry. You were part of the documentary that's available on HBO Max, Finding Amelia, and you're like very, prominently featured in the documentary. So if you've enjoyed tonight, you need to go watch it as well as listen to Jen's podcast, Vanished. But can you give us a couple more of your kind of favorite theories, or maybe ones that, have a big question mark on them still? And then, of course, we're going to ask you what you think happened as the resident Amelia Earhart expert.
Another theory that I like that's gaining traction is another friend of mine named Bill Snavely. He thinks that he might have found the plane in Bougainville, in Buka, which is in Papua New Guinea as well, because the other theory we're going to talk about is a Papua New Guinea theory. And he has a theory that's very similar to the one that we talked about on the documentary. He has found a plane. It is in very shallow water, and it's covered by ecologically important coral, and it's very difficult to retrieve anything. And the coral itself is degrading the plane to the point where there were photos taken of it several years ago, and then there were photos taken of it more recently, and it almost doesn't even look like a plane anymore. Like, there is 100% without a doubt there is a plane there, but the question is, like, what plane is it? And he thinks that it's Amelia's plane. He has, they've taken a bunch of measurements. They think that everything matches up. They even were able to take some larger pieces, like a landing light, things like that. Nothing that's going to have like a serial number on it or anything. And they were able to get DNA from two pilots, a pilot and presumably a co-pilot. They did try to do DNA testing on it. My understanding is that it's just so degraded they really weren't able to get much information out of it, but they do know that there were two people in the plane. So there's a lot of things that does kind of fit. There's just not enough information to say for certain what it is. I think it's a really interesting theory. because there is somebody's plane there. And I've always said on Vanish, like, don't stop trying to figure out what that is and who those people are that are under the coral, because that's an important question to be answered, even if it's not Amelia Earhart. But he's one of the ones that will say that she only had like 950 gallons of fuel. And his theory doesn't have her making it all the way to Howland. So the big reason why I have a hard time saying, yeah, I really think that you've got something, is because for his theory to work, she would have had to turn around much, much sooner to be able to get all the way back to where she's found. And he's got an explanation for like why the Itasca is picking up her radio signals and why she's saying what she's saying. But I mean, ultimately, like at the end of the day, to me, I can't wrap my head around. Like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that she would be talking to the Itasca. It doesn't make sense that she would be saying, "I'm almost on you and I can't see you," if she's trying to land her plane in Bougainville. I can't make that make sense in my head, which is why I am having a hard time with it. But if not for that, like, it seems like you have found something really, really interesting. And I really want him to go back out there. He's trying to raise money for a third expedition.
So on the radio signals, to return to those, because I just feel like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
key is in the radio signals.
The key
So for
is in the
his
radio
theory,
signals. And I couldn't answer your last question, so I don't know if I can answer this one.
well, but for his theory to work, I mean, that I don't know the geography very well, but I assume that position closer to Papua New Guinea is a long way away from where that ship was located, far
That's
enough
correct.
away that you would not hear radio signals from her. And if she's
That is
saying,
correct.
I'm going to keep repeating this, I mean, if for instance you told me that her initial signals were a 5, and then they started recording them as a 4, and then as a 3, and then her last one was a 1, where it seemed like she was traveling away from the Itasca, such that she says the last thing we know of, and then she does repeat it, but she's just at that point so far away from the ship they can't hear her because she's heading back to Papua New Guinea. Unless you tell me that's the case, I don't know how the radio signals work with that theory.
So, what he will tell you, and what pretty much anyone who thinks that her final resting place is not within 100 miles of Howland Island, they all kind of have to rely on this same phenomenon, which is skip. That's what it's been called, sometimes harmonics. So basically, what's happening, and this is possible. I've talked to radio people that say this is 100% possible, but you can hear signals from very far away that sound as if they are close due to the fact that signals are bouncing off of the ionosphere in a certain way. So it is confirmed possible, highly coincidental, if that is what happened. But that is what had to have happened if her plane is not within 100 miles of Howland when she is sending those signals. And depending on the theory and who you're talking to, some people will say, yes, that is what's happening, because when she's saying these things, she is somewhere else. And then on the documentary, Michael Cara's theory is that no, she was within 100 miles of Howland and she was sending those signals, but then she left. To explain why the sudden drop off, radio's broken. The radio cut off. The radio
I was going to
stopped
say, why
working.
didn't she say I'm turning around? You know?
That is the most commonly asked question I get. And I think it's a great question. And I think the answer, if Michael's theory is correct, the answer is going to be that her radio just finally went kaput, which I do think is possible because she's confirmed to have radio problems.
let me ask you this. If she was within 100 miles and she didn't know how to do the water landing properly, and when she landed in such a way that the plane very quickly filled with water and sank, wouldn't that explain the fact that despite the massive search that followed, they didn't find any sign of her?
Yes, it would. And again, a lot of this is like talking to people that are smarter than I am because I don't know, you know. But this is mostly coming from Tom Vincent and Tom Detweiler that work with Nautico. They say that if she didn't land just perfect, that the plane was nose heavy. And if you even have one tiny little break in the metal, these are not pressurized vehicles the way like now you'll fly in like a pressurized cabin, right? It was just one tiny little like penetration in the aluminum, and you've got water immediately filling up the plane and making it probably to where they can't even open the hatch and get out. And Tom Detweiler thinks 30 minutes is how long it would have taken for the plane to go under and to not be seen from the surface.
That's pretty fast and sounds like a nightmare. We could talk to you about this forever, and we might. Brett might actually. But what do you think happened? And do you think that we will ever be able to find any trace of her plane or Amelia Earhart?
So I think that Michael Kara's theory is very interesting, and I don't want to spoil it because I really want you to watch the documentary. I think that it has problems. The biggest problem in my mind are the radio logs. When we did Vanished, I tried very hard not to take a stance because I wanted to be critical of everybody. And once we were done with everything, my co-host asked me, like, so what do you think? And what I think is that she crashed into the ocean within 100 miles of Howland Island, that she sank really quickly, that she went straight to the bottom of the ocean, and that since that time, the plane's probably not going to still be in the same spot. I think it's going to take a really long time to find her, but I think that someone's going to find her. And I think they're going to find her at the bottom of the ocean. And I hope I'm right, because if I am right, that far down, that plane will still be dang near pristine. And we'll have so much evidence on what happened. And we'll be able to probably save some of the few personal effects they had with them. When they when they found the Titanic, there were newspapers inside that you could still read the print. And so selfishly, I hope that's what happened, because if she crash landed in the jungle, that plane's torn to pieces. There's nothing left. If she's in Bougainville, the plane is already gone. That plane has been eaten up by the coral. I think that the only real piece of hard evidence we have are the logs. And the logs have her flying really, really close. And her last word was wait. You don't say wait unless you think you're about to say something else. And you don't follow that up with anything unless you can't, right? So that's what I think happened.
I mean, you're the expert. I hope that is the case too, that we'll be able to find it one day and that there will be, pristine condition things that we can look at. And also, I like your theory in the sense that I believe that she was so close to her destination. And in some ways, even though she didn't make it to Howland, the fact that she essentially did make it, right? Kind of, but for this technological error, they could have gotten her right back. She had enough fuel probably to make it to Howland. She was right in the vicinity. Like, in my mind, she did it. She just didn't land on Howland. And it was, I'm going to blame a mechanic on that. But it wasn't her flight skills. Maybe her Morse code skills, but let's not blame her. And I mean, we know that she got that far, right? Which is incredible in and of itself, that she has made it essentially, she's been in the air long enough to make it there. And if anything, I think the reason this continues to capture people's, imaginations is the idea of knowing you're going to take off into the abyss for 20 plus hours with nothing but really like sharks and waves below you is one of the bravest things I could ever think of. And I think that's why she continues to live in just absolute, as an icon. Because though she didn't make it to her final destination, in a lot of ways she did. She took off knowing the immense risks that she was facing. And had she not done that, there probably would be a lot more things that people would have been afraid to do. And it says a lot that, almost 100 years later, there are still movies and documentaries and podcasts being made about her and people going to look for her. And I do hope that she is found for closure and because of the role she has in history and continues to have in history. Thank you I learned so much about Amelia Earhart. I hope all of you did as well. And you're such a fascinating storyteller. Like I said, if you guys haven't heard Vanished, you need to go listen to Jen over there. She talks about lots of things other than Amelia Earhart. We just made her talk all about Amelia Earhart because now I love her.
She has that effect on people.
This was the best interview we've ever done. I could talk about this all night. This is amazing. Thank you so much. So much for coming on.
The answer to your question. Because now I'm like,
I believe you will. I believe you will.
We can have a part two anytime.
Yeah, we can have a part two. Absolutely. But if anything, I hope this
out.
whets people's appetites because you have so much more on your podcast about Amelia Earhart. And you also
hours and hours and hours.
It's so good.
You could talk about this for days. I mean, that's the thing. Like, there are as many theories about what happened to her and sub theories as there are people that have ever looked at it. And there's just so much data, way too much to really give you all of it in an hour. So please do. Please go listen to what we covered on Vanished. It's got everything you could ever want and more. Like, we will spend just hours talking about fuel calculations. You will die of just like the mind numbing math of it all. So
Well, you know what? You see, this is why you fit in perfectly. You weren't here for our conversation yesterday, but we have decided that math is not real. And the fact that you said you have the smartest people trying to figure out through math what happened to Amelia Earhart and they haven't been able to do it proves our theory that math is just not real.
Further proof. Further
I like
proof.
your theory.
Yeah.
I like your theory.
Well, I'm going to go watch this documentary like immediately after.
Like I was late today because I was watching it. That's how good it is, you guys. And we are just so excited to have had you on, Jen. You are welcome back anytime. You guys go watch Finding Amelia on HBO Max. It's streaming now. And you'll get to hear Jen. You looked amazing in it. You sounded so smart in it. And like I said, she is heavily featured in that documentary. And you can also go listen to her on her podcast, Vanished, wherever you get podcasts. Jen, is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off for the day?
Just thank you so much for having me on. I'm big fans of the Prosecutors podcast. I love you guys. So it's a thrill being here and it was really nice hanging out.
So fun hanging out with you. We're huge fans of you as well. Brett, you look like you're chomping at the bit talking about a radio center. Anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
Just thank you again. Thank you again.
Well, guys, this has been such a fun change of pace. We've loved this interview. Go listen more of Jen on Vanish and also on Finding Amelia. Thank you for being here tonight. And as always, let us know what you think. Let us know your theories about Amelia Earhart, why you love her, where you think she is, how you're going to be the next person to find her if you're dressing up as her for Halloween. We'd love to hear at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. We're all over the social medias as well. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Good intro. Hold on. I'm so caught up in the anomalies in the Papua New Guinea.
This is gonna do the same thing that DB Cooper did to me. I'm gonna end up falling down this. We're gonna have to.
I know. It is reminding me of DB Cooper. Okay, enough teasers. We got it. We got to intro in this. Okay. I can't come up with. I'm too wrapped up in the. I'm just gonna come up with a descriptor because it's not about you anyway, Brett.
No, it never is.
It never is about you. That's the beauty of this.